But with the help of TV reruns, the two pioneers of television comedy will be together forever.
Desiderio Alberto Arnaz was an unlikely television star, a Cuban band leader with a thick accent.
I come from Havana, and there's always mañana.
But he and his wife Lucille Ball created one of the most popular television comedies ever. I Love Lucy ended its original run in 1957, but it is still rerunning all over the world, generation after generation, laughing at the antics of Lucy and Desi. 3 years ago, Desi Arnaz reminisced about those days for the program Entertainment Tonight.
I Love Lucy, you know, is something that happens once in a lifetime, you know. If you're lucky enough to have it happen at all.
They knew that I like cigars.
Desi Arnaz, a longtime smoker, died of lung cancer. His daughter, Lucy Arnaz Luckenbill, was with him at the end.
I can say that he died with me in my arms, and that we loved him very much. I can tell you not to smoke.
Tonight, there's a wreath next to the Desi Arnaz star on Hollywood Boulevard. But perhaps the best memorial is all that laughter, still preserved on film.
That versatile entertainer, Lucy Ricardo! Ah!
That's the early news for Tuesday. Coming up, Jack Webster.
Good evening, and tonight we're going to deal with some of the problems of policing a city like Vancouver. Take, for instance, the BC Court of Appeal judgment, which had the effect of reinstating former policemen who had been dismissed, and now that man's due a couple of $100,000 back pay. This and other topics tonight with Chief Bob Stewart. But first, here's Steve with the rundown.
How much should your children know about sex, and at what age? The U.S. Surgeon General says sex education should start in the 3rd grade, but in BC, most schools avoid the topic completely. Tonight, 2 experts on sex education, Dr. Peter Grantham of the Family Practice Unit at UBC, and Barbara Hestrin, Education Coordinator for Planned Parenthood. But first, there is a new procedure for investigating complaints against police under orders from the Attorney General. That following the case of the missing and returned emerald ring, which has led to charges against a former police officer. In the studio now with Webster, Vancouver Police Chief Bob Stewart.
Let's deal with that topic first, Chief Stewart. I had the Attorney General on the air the other day, in which he was saying that he was planning to amend the Police Act, yes, the Police Act, so that there could be a kind of civilian review board where complaints are made about police officers. Is that a good proposition? Is that necessary from your point of view?
No, I don't believe that's necessary, Jack. And in the statements of the last several days, I'm not sure how I can separate some of the comments that the Attorney General made about the Winterton case, which was the issue of the day, and then the comments he made relative to the general practice of dealing with complaints against police. I think they're 2 separate and totally different subject matter. And I am not aware of any briefs or draft legislation that's been prepared at this moment. And I would really hope that before anything is passed into law, that there's an opportunity for those parties with an interest to be consulted, the same way we were consulted when the Police Act was drafted in 1974.
Is there no civilian interchange just now? If I make a complaint about a police officer and I'm unhappy with, say, your internal inquiry, where does it go from there now?
Every inquiry that I make relative to a complaint against a police officer is at some point in the process passed before the Citizens Board, which is my executive board, the Vancouver Police Board. And under certain conditions, the complainant has the right to a full public inquiry. I really don't understand how that can be any more open than that, Jack. There has to be some time at the beginning of the process where the police can investigate, collect the facts, and put them before me, the person responsible in Vancouver, for the discipline of the force. I make my decisions, and they're all subject to review by a Citizens Board, the Vancouver Police Board. So I fail to see where there is a problem at the moment.
just to jump to the Jacobsen case, the man who was injured while in the custody of the police, is there not about to be a public inquiry into that, which is a kind of special public inquiry? Because you were very unhappy with the fact that you couldn't get any evidence against any policeman who might have been directly involved in that.
In the Jacobsen affair, if I can just quickly recap, Jack, it was a complaint from an individual, Mr. Jacobsen. There was a full-blown investigation. There was insufficient evidence for criminal charges. There was a public inquiry under the Police Act, and still we were not satisfied. I was not satisfied. Jacobsen was not satisfied. The police board was not satisfied. I then asked the Attorney General under another section of the Police Act to provide another inquiry. And that is going to take place. It's scheduled, I believe, for sometime in January. Counsel has been appointed to conduct that inquiry, and we just have to wait and see what comes from that.
On the Winterton case, from which charges have now been laid, you got quite a little bit of heat and criticism over the fact that charges had not been laid. Were you entitled to get that heat?
Well, I don't think so. I think that some of the heat was premature. I think that my file went to Crown with a suggestion that there were charges possible. The Crown, fulfilling its role, representative of the community interest, said no charges. On the other hand, by that time I had been notified by young Winterton that he was resigning from the department. I lost my jurisdiction under the Police Act. You can't proceed against someone who's not an employee under the Police Act. Then we had some heat, if you want.
Publicity.
Publicity. A lot of that publicity was directed at me because I wouldn't comment on the content of the file. You see, there's nothing in our system that allows for the contents of a criminal investigation file to become public except in a courtroom. The proper place where evidence can be produced under the rules of evidence and guilt can be determined or innocence can be determined. So I think it's in the right place now, and in due course we'll see the next chapter. There will be a trial, I hope a fair trial according to our system, and let the court decide.
Right. Now, perhaps when a policeman's involved, that's always where, if there's any dubiety at all, the decision should be made because of the policeman's special status in the community.
Oh, no question. I think that either through public inquiry or through a criminal trial or sometimes in a civil trial.
Let's go to the parallel case of the other one, the very touchy Carpenter case. Now, this is a case where a man was fired by you.
Yes.
Was charged.
Yes.
Was acquitted.
Yes. In
the final analysis of the charges. And now you have, in effect, been ordered to take him back and pay him how much in back pay?
It's very close to $200,000 in back pay.
Well, that must sit unhappily with you. But what is the lesson that can be learned from that situation, if there is one to be learned in the public interest or in the interest of the individual police officer?
Well, Jack, the lesson to be learned is not one that's being learned right at this particular point in time. It's a lesson that was learned several years ago, that there's something wrong with the process in the Police Act that allows me to deal with employees who, and I have to be careful, who I deem unsuitable for police work. Now, let me first caution everyone that I don't have the power to dismiss. I can recommend a dismissal to my executive board, the police board. In this particular case in point, that was done, the board agreed with me, and a dismissal was made. Now, the appeal court is now saying that we used the wrong process. We should have charged him under the Police Act. You got to remember that this officer was charged in criminal court and acquitted. If I had charged him under the Police Act, I would have been using the same facts, the same burden of proof, and the same test, which is that of evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. That, in fact, amounts to double jeopardy. I could not do that. I was in a situation where the only way I could deal with it was to summarily dismiss on the basis of the evidence I had before me, which might not necessarily be the same evidence before a criminal court.
I thought you had a separate standard, an internal discipline standard, by which if a man, hypothetically speaking, was not deemed then to be fit for an officer, that you could summarily fire him and his only response would be a union grievance.
Well, that would have been the case if I had dismissed on the basis of the Labor Act, the collective agreement, then the recourse is through the grievance procedure. However, that did not happen in this case. There was a grievance filed and then withdrawn or stayed by the individual. And then we got into a whole process, a legal argument, if you like. You know, we haven't yet dealt with the facts of this case,
No.
nor are we likely to ever be able to deal with the facts in this case. We are now dealing with the process. And I think the judgment by the Appeal Court of British Columbia makes it very clear that I don't have the same right as any other employer in terms of dealing with employees who ought not to be there.
That's a tough one.
It's a tough one.
Well, let me put it to you this way. Do you think that a police board, or you acting for your police board, should have a separate and, if you like, a separate authority whereby you can dismiss or punish a person who has turned out to be an unsatisfactory officer without going through the full burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt as required in the criminal code?
I think that the Police Act should be amended to make it very clear that the normal employee-employer relationships should be dealt with under the collective agreement, and that discipline, internal discipline, not designed to dismiss a person, but designed to rehabilitate a person in the service, should stay. I think there has to be a clear definition. I'm now being forced to use a discipline code to reach the dismissal stage. And subsequent to that, there are all kinds of levels of appeal, and rightly there should be. But here we got involved in a legal argument over which is the right process.
Well, is the Carpenter case a case that will be unique and cannot be repeated? Or could that happen again and again and again?
Well, I certainly am not going to let it happen again. I think there is a solution to that one. I think it lies in the hands of the Attorney General in terms of an amendment to the Police Act, and I think that that should be his priority in amending the Police Act, not dealing with the general run-of-the-mill complaints against police officers, which I think is handled quite appropriately.
What is the amendment you want to see to the Police Act from the Attorney General to deal with this kind of case?
To separate out the issue of dismissal as a matter for the collective bargaining process or the collective agreement process, and the right of appeal would be in the same manner as every other employee, the right to grieve and to go to arbitration on the facts.
Hypothetically speaking, though, if a man were dismissed on that grievance procedure and the right to arbitration, etc., that would not totally take away any rights of the Crown to lay charges.
Oh, no, we're not talking now about a criminal situation, because we have to keep those very clear. A police officer is subject to criminal investigation and criminal charges, whether he resigns in the middle of the incident or later or before, it doesn't matter. You never remove yourself, no one removes themselves from the impact of the criminal justice system, but a police officer can remove himself from the Police Act by resigning, and we've seen all kinds of examples of that.
Bob Stewart, Chief Constable of the City of Vancouver. Yeah, I'll go to the phones after the break. It's a tricky one to understand, but the Carpenter case has spotlighted it. I just want to put it once to Chief Constable Stewart again. What a Chief Constable requires with his board is ability to file for cause, followed by a normal grievance or grievance procedures under the Labour Code.
That's what I would recommend.
Anything else outside of that is something which is always there in the law.
If we're not looking at a dismissal situation and we simply want to do some remedial discipline type things, then the Police Act is quite fine.
This thing took years to go through the courts, didn't it?
Well,
Far be it from me to criticize the courts, but it did take years to go through the courts.
Oh, much too long. It's unfortunate that we have to wait that long to get that kind of experience behind us.
Go ahead, please.
Hello. I went through the process of making a complaint against the police a year ago, and to make a very long story short, I was appalled and thought that there were sort of conflict of interest situations. I made a complaint with regard to Staff Sergeant McNabb.
Oh, I wish you'd leave the details off the air just now, because we don't know.
I'd like to spend about 15 minutes and talk to you about it sometime, Jack. It's quite a story.
Well, call me off the air and I'll talk to you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, for that $200,000 that constable will be getting back in back pay, where will that money be coming from? Does the police have a special fund for that, or will it be covered by their insurance?
No, we don't have a special fund, and we don't have insurance, and it'll have to come from the coffers of the city of Vancouver.
Come out of the normal budget.
Oh. Will taxes be affected by that?
Oh, I don't think it would actually affect the mill rate in the city.
I doubt it. I think you should look at it in the context that had this individual been with us during that period of time, you would have paid that in salaries at any rate. What we've really lost is the services of one man for a period of almost 5 years.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes, yes.
I'd like to know what process that the Vancouver policemen go through to be hired.
Okay.
And time and time again, they've gone through court and they've been proved liars by professional lawyers.
Oh, thank you very much. I must admit, Chief Stewart, we're getting some very nice calls tonight.
Oh, well, it's open season at the moment, I would suspect.
No,
but
I'm not going to take calls like that.
No.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I would like to have the Chief Constable answer why does things have to come to a public attention before they are dealt with the police?
Well, that's a good question. Have you been slow on any of these matters?
I don't think that's the case. I think what you've got here is a police department that is open and above board and reports the kinds of things we're hearing. You know, I don't think for a moment that this is the only police force in the country or in the world that has these kinds of problems. We just happen to tell our people what's going on.
Go ahead, please. Hello.
Hello.
That's you, sir.
Hello.
That's you, sir.
Yes, good evening, Chief Bob Stewart.
Good evening.
You've taken on an awful lot of flack in the last few weeks. I just would like to thank you people for something that happened to me down. I was taking my wife and I were going to a movie one night, and I was with another couple, and when we were my wife was basically attacked by one of the thugs on Granville Street. The two of us quickly cleaned his clock, and we were actually taken in, and we had your officers paid us the utmost respect, and we were released as soon as the stories were laid out on the table, and we couldn't have asked for anything more.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Hello, John?
Yes?
Yes, what I would like to know is, I mean, how bad are our boys in blue? I mean, just how many complaints are we looking at a year or against them?
How many complaints a year?
Yeah, I mean, do we have a real problem with our police force, or?
No, I think I'd like to make. I can't get into a lot of detail. Time doesn't allow it. But let me tell you that the kinds of complaints that we deal with run the full gamut from very minor to very serious.
What are we looking at, though? How many?
Oh well, what difference would the number make? It's a question.
Well, I think it makes a great difference because.
Well, I don't think it makes a big difference if in that number I've included everybody who gets a traffic ticket who doesn't think they deserve it makes a complaint against the officer. That certainly distorts the number, and that's not what we're talking about.
I'm really thinking of like serious complaints.
I realize
you know,
that.
Like
serious,
beatings or theft or dishonesty.
Well, I think what's most important is if it does happen at all, that the police officers ferret these people out and put them before the courts, and I think that's our record.
Okay. How about like dishonest complaints? Are there a lot or few in a year against your
well in excess of 40% of the complaints we get turn out to be unfounded or easily resolved or simply cases of misunderstanding.
40%.
We're talking about criminal complaints. Half a dozen a year may be the number. I would hope that you would look at it in the bigger picture.
Well, I would like to say that I have the greatest admiration for
I'd like to just make
I really do.
I'd like to make the statement that I'm dealing with about 1,000 officers, and I would really hope that each group of 1,000 professionals in other fields in our community were paying as much attention to those people in their midst who weren't performing to standards.
Yeah, they have a tough job, I'll tell you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Go ahead from Aldergrove.
Hi, Jack and Bob. Bob, I want to say I agree with you, and I know you very well. We were classmates. I agree with you that the Police Act has to be amended in order that you can deal with people that, as a chief, you've lost confidence in, where you've lost confidence in the integrity of that employee. And there's been a couple of cases that I know of. The Carpenter case is one of them, and there is another one beginning with a W. And I think you should have the ability to deal with those cases without having to go through the courts.
Well, that was the intent of this evening's discussion, was not to make it open season without justification of Chief Bob Stewart, but to look at some of the mechanisms by which these matters are investigated in the Winterton case and in the Carpenter case and in the Jacobsen case. And thank you for your call. Go ahead, please.
Hello. My question is, I agree with what you were saying in the fact that you have lost the ability to deal with an employee on an employee-employer relationship. If an officer resigns in order to avoid the police commission and no charges are brought up against him, can he come back to the force, and will he have to go up against that commission if he does return to the force?
Well, he can't, if he resigns from the force or he is fired and the firing sticks, I doubt very much whether I or any other police force would ever hire him.
Okay, well, I'm not saying if he's fired, just if he resigns in order to avoid the police commission and the courts have not laid, or the Attorney General has not laid.
Well, there's no criminal charges. If there's no criminal charges and he resigns, why would anybody want to take him back?
The point has been made that a police officer can resign during the course of an internal inquiry, and that might prevent internal discipline against them, but it can't prevent a criminal pursuit if such is desirable.
That's very clear, and I've had to say that repeatedly through all of these events, is that there seems to be some sort of perception that because a person resigns from the police force, that they can't be charged criminally. I mean, that is utterly ridiculous. That does not remove yourself or anyone from criminal jurisdiction.
I think what we're doing was, you're making the point very clearly tonight, that there is obvious need for some clarification of the Police Act, perhaps, the criminal code is perfectly clear, whereby when a police officer is deemed undesirable, he can be removed from the force, giving him the proper rights of appeal short of criminal action.
That's quite right, and I'm quite prepared to go into any forum and produce my dossier on the kinds of people we've been talking about. I first of all have to have the opportunity to do that. I have not had the opportunity to do that.
My thanks to Chief Constable Bob Stewart. I'll be back after the break. Would you believe we're now going to discuss sex education on Webster at 25 after 5 at night, but with a serious purpose because of a serious problem. And I have two very learned people with me tonight. I have Barbara Hestrin, who's the Education Coordinator of Planned Parenthood, British Columbia, and Dr. Peter Grantham, Professor and Head of the Department of Family Practice at the University of British Columbia. Now, the reason I'm raising the subject tonight, Dr. Grantham, is because I've been doing some programs on STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. And it would appear obvious even to the old square that I am, that education in sex, with its new deadly aspects, is going to have to begin on a much wider and broader scale in our schools and in our communities. Now, is my basic supposition anywhere near a point of rectitude?
Yes, I would think most people would agree with that. That statement was very vividly made in that current issue of Time magazine by the Surgeon General of the United States, who made some pretty provocative statements there based on his particular concerns about AIDS as a STD.
Yeah, he says, in fact, we need sex education in schools, which must include information on heterosexual and homosexual relationships, starting at the lowest grade possible.
And suggested grade 3, in his opinion, was the grade that he thought was appropriate.
Can you see that happening in British Columbia?
Not at the present time.
Can you see any need for the improvement in overall sex education? Because as I understand it, there is very little in the schools even now, Barbara Hestrin.
Well, there is sex education happening in the schools, but it's not consistent, and it starts at various levels in various schools, and that reflects the general policy of our Ministry of Education, which is to leave that whole area up to the discretion of the individual school district and the individual school boards.
Should it be different from that?
Well, my bias, and I think Dr. Grantham's and a lot of other people who are involved in this area, is that yes, we do need a much greater degree of central direction in instituting programs that are health education, that include sexuality education as part of that.
Are we back to the old family life story again?
I think that's part of it. As a matter of fact, I very much deplore this idea that we suddenly have got to start doing this because if you go out and have sex, you're going to get a disease and die. I think that's a very, very poor reason on which to predicate an extensive, comprehensive, integrated sort of program that I think Barbara's talking about.
Might be a good excuse to start talking about it among adults to begin with.
Well, it's one reason.
And what are the other reasons?
Well, the other reasons have to do, I think, with the effectiveness with which people grow up as persons, as individuals, and as developing and be comfortable citizens, and good children, and good parents, and good grandparents, and good productive people, feeling comfortable about themselves and the world that they live in. I think that's the more cogent, more impelling sort of reason than worrying about getting a disease and dying.
Oh, no, I agree with you, but is there not a much greater demand on youngsters, or a greater influence on youngsters than there ever was before in the kind of raw sexuality which is thrown at them in every form of communication?
Well, the media are very effective in that regard, you're quite right.
Dangerously effective.
Effective.
I think there's an unequal weighting on the negative side of what children are getting from the media, for sure. There are some very positive things that can be used from the media to teach children about sexuality, but without direction and with parental guidance, or without the parental guidance, that is lost. It really is a negative influence on children.
Now, we don't have an overall coordinated educational
Well, you
plan
see, what Barbara said is very interesting, Jack. Our provincial government says, yes, we have a policy and we're in favor of sex education, but, as she said, we leave it to the local school boards. The school boards pretty consistently say, yeah, we have a policy and we're in favor. And in our jurisdiction, we by and large assign responsibility for how it gets implemented to the school. And the principal is therefore responsible. The principal has the right to say, yes, our school has a policy and by and large we're in favor, and the guidance department do it. The guidance head says, yes, okay, we'll do it, and he may or may not do it himself or assign it to somebody, and if he does, it may or may not be the best, most effective, most experienced, most capable teacher, or they may not do it at all, or they may bring somebody in. So everybody says, yes, we have a policy, and yes, we are basically generically, administratively in favor, but the implementation of it, as Barbara said, I would agree, is spotty and is inconsistent.
How should it be done? And it shouldn't just be a standard program covering every aspect for different grade levels throughout the province.
Why not?
I think that's an excellent idea.
But who's going to do it?
That's the other side of the question, is that teachers in the school system are human beings like everyone else. They have their own baggage of sexual feelings and concerns and value systems that they're packing around. They need some training. And that takes it right back to educating the educators first and making the educators who are doing these particular parts of the program, making it kind of necessary for them to fit into the criteria for good sex educators.
That's right. And that's whether they're teachers in the program, whether they're school nurses, whether they're a doctor like myself who gets asked to come into the school, whether they are people like come from Planned Parenthood who are volunteer educators, that the same criteria would apply to all of them.
Is there not still considerable resistance among many families and some religious groups and many school districts to any teaching of sexual education?
There is a vocal minority. But there have been Gallup polls done canvassing Canadians' opinions about this kind of thing, family life or sex education or whatever euphemism you want to use for it. There's an overwhelming support for this kind of programming to be available in the schools across Canada.
But we shouldn't be panicked by the outspoken comments of people like the Surgeon General, Coop, on what he thinks. He overdoes it, does he?
I would say so.
I think he's overreacting to a very specific part of a concern about sexual health And what I'm as concerned, and I'm sure Dr. Grantham and other people are, with the incidence of chlamydia, for example, which is a much greater risk to a sexually active adolescent in BC at this time than AIDS is, and probably will be for some time to come. Chlamydia is an infection which can cause pelvic inflammatory disease and lead to sterility. And that is not getting the focus that it needs to get.
Is that something which should be taught in schools, or is that
Well, awareness of it, it certainly should be indeed, because a very high percentage of people in our community here now carry chlamydia, men and women. The reservoir for AIDS, as you know, is very circumscribed, and how you get it is very well understood, and the likelihood of your getting it is very obvious. And it's pretty obvious how you avoid getting it. That is not true for chlamydia, or herpes, another excellent example.
But they wouldn't be discussed in sex education in our schools in any event, would they?
Oh, sure.
yes,
When you get asked to go to a school these days, they want you to
happens?
say two things. The first thing that the principal wants you to say, we want you to scare hell out of the kids, tell them they're going to get a disease if they have intercourse. The second thing is, if you have intercourse, you'll get pregnant. So tell them not to, because they'll get pregnant. That sort of is the thrust of, and with the AIDS business, that's getting sharper.
And do you follow their advice in that? Do
No,
you think that's
no.
good advice?
I think it's, as I would agree with Barbara, that's too narrow a perspective, and it's not one which I particularly support. It's part of it. The young people are the people in our community who are at risk to get STDs. A sedate elderly gentleman like yourself is not at much risk to get an STD these days. Well, you never know, of course. But you know, the reservoir is in sexually active young people who have a number of sexual partners. Those are the people that are at risk, and they need to know that. And they need to know what the risks are, and they need to know how not to get it.
Are you happy that we're telling the children of the appropriate ages in the schools of these particular dangers and ever-present problems?
At the present time?
No.
No, I don't think we are.
We're not doing an adequate job yet. I think we can.
The BCMA 2 years ago did a survey of all the secondary schools in this province. Half of them answered the survey, and of those half who answered, and you assume those are the good guys, you know, that have something positive to answer.
Right.
Of those half who answered, 25% said that they had some sexuality education in their school. That might be one lecture in grade 12.
About birth control.
And that might be it. Or a lecture in grade 10 on menstruation given to the girls. That might be the program. There's no, that wasn't expanded on any further than that. So we don't do anything like a consistent across-the-board
I haven't
job.
even talked about teenage pregnancies. Are they up, down, or sideways?
Well, they're declining, which, you know, overall, if you look at the overall age level. But the problem is that in the younger teens, the under 15s, there is an increased number.
They're not changing very much.
No, it's
the
not.
numbers
It's not
are
drastic.
they're staying the same.
Well, I'm telling you, you're an eye-opener for a sedate old gentleman like myself. I might as well tell you, thrusting back on you the description you gave of me, talking about me, not about you. Questions to the sedate old gentleman's guests.
I'm sure I said elderly, not old.
Barbara Hestrin of Plan to Hit Parenthood, and Peter Grantham, doctor, professor and head of the Family Practice Department at UBC. Are these questions on, what's the questions on? Sex education. And I've been getting my sex education from the good doctor. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Hello, Jack. Dr. Grantham, I'm curious if you're aware of the situation here in British Columbia. Granted, I graduated back in 1971, but there is no such thing as a guidance class in British Columbia school systems, to the best of my knowledge. And having come originally from Ontario, it would have definitely helped me out in a number of ways if there would be such a thing existing in British Columbia. Also, I'm curious as to chlamydia. What are all the symptoms, et cetera, et cetera? I tuned in late to the show.
Okay.
Okay, I think you're wrong. Most schools have indeed got a guidance department. There are guidance counselors on all our secondary schools that I'm aware of, and in relation to this particular area that we're talking about, family life education or education for living or whatever term, some schools, Vancouver for example, and some other major school districts have large curricula, you know, from kindergarten to grade 12, curricula all on the books. So certainly there are guidance classes, and they're pretty consistent. Chlamydia is a type of bacteria which as Barbara Hestrin has already told us, infects the genital tract of both men and women. It is one of the commonest cause of what used to be called, and usually still is called, non-specific urethritis, non-gonorrhea infection of the urethra in the male, and of infection of the fallopian tubes and uterus, PID, pelvic inflammatory disease, in the women. And it's very, very common, and it's transmitted through sexual intercourse.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, Jack. I was just going to relate something that happened. Now, I've been out of school for about 4 or 5 years. When I was in school, we got sex education. During that, one of the kids asked what VD was. Now, the only answer the teacher could possibly come up with for it was, well, that's a disease you get from sex. And that was all we got on VD, total.
Well, time to...
That underscores the point we've already made about the need for teacher training, that teachers can't be expected to know everything about the course content that they're giving. And if somebody's teaching social studies, they get social studies training. If they're teaching sexuality education, they should have access to
Actually, that underlines a
kind of
bias that
training.
I have, that I think general practitioner type doctors can make good sex educators if they have the skills and the time and the interest to so do.
Yes, because they
they
have
see
the
these things,
knowledge.
and they see the pregnant girls, and they get pretty emotionally involved and aware of all the ramifications and the issues, and I think that gives them a good perspective. But I don't think you have to be a doctor to do it.
No. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack. Good evening. I'd just like to say to your guests that, number one, I'm 100% behind sexual education in schools. I am a parent. I have 2 children of my own. And the only concern I have is that it be taught by a, how should I say, a knowledgeable person rather than just a run-of-the-mill teacher. I don't believe they have the type of ability to teach this thing. I know we had sex education when I was in school, and we didn't get much out of it. We learned more from behind the barn, coming from a farm family. But I am concerned that it be taught by a competent person.
Well, the average teacher should be able to teach sex education basics, should they not?
Not without some special interest and preparation, therefore, any more than you can teach science without studying science a bit.
Thank you.
But I agree with what that gentleman said, and we've already made that point.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm both a parent and a teacher, and I believe that it's about time that the parents themselves learn to speak honestly to their children about sexuality from the time they were small, instead of allowing the school to do it. Thank you.
I really feel that that's an excellent point that this lady has made, that parents are the primary and the most important sexuality educators of their children, whether they know it or not, and whether they make an attempt to even talk to their children or not, they are educating their children. So what we also need to do is look at ways of helping parents become more efficient at doing that job, more comfortable with it, able to answer their children's
Have you
questions.
any recommendations on that?
Well, everybody puts parents right up there at the top of the list of where we should learn as individuals about our sexuality, and I don't think anybody argues with that. That leads into things like, 2 things I think. One is maybe there is a need for programs for parental, how to teach parents to be more effective, because the data that we have in Canada suggests that by and large parents don't do it terribly well. The other point to make in this regard that's very clear, in communities where sex education programs have been contemplated or implemented, they do best where there is strong parental support behind them. And I think that's a very important point to know.
I should imagine the parental support is pretty patchy in places in school districts.
Well, it's very interesting to me. When I work for Planned Parenthood, I do a lot of programs for parent groups. And the support is definitely there, even in districts where traditionally we expect there not to be support. The parents who come out and listen to the programs are wildly enthusiastic about the whole
My
idea.
experience is the same, except you're talking to the converted. That is part of the problem. And the ones that aren't coming out...
are the ones who are not converted.
Well, they may or may not be.
But they're also not coming out and complaining. They're very quietly staying away, which is a difference. They're not out picketing.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yep.
First off, I'd like to advise all your listeners to write their MLA and convince them to have such education, at least instigated by grade 8. I didn't have such education until grade 11. That was the first practical experience.
What do you say about grade 8, Barbara?
I'd say grade 11 is kind of late, and probably this fellow
Is
will
grade
agree.
8 not a bit late
14.
too?
Well, actually, I think elementary school is a better time to start.
Grade 6 and 7, I agree.
Good. Thank you very much indeed.
But it depends what you're going to talk about. You don't talk about everything at grade 6.
You can start some things at grade 3.
Well, of course.
Or grade 4.
As Surgeon General Coop says.
Yes.
Well, in fact, we do start with some grade 3s, and we teach them how to look after their bodies and what the names of the parts of their bodies are and how to be safe, and it's that kind of approach.
Go ahead from Vernon.
Yes, Peter, I'd just like to say that, you and I probably started dating girls about the same time in the same school. I think the sex education that we got in those days was nothing or very little. Anything that you're doing along this line, I'm 100% behind it, and you deserve a pat in the back.
Did you go to school with Peter?
Yes, I did. More years ago than I want to admit.
100 years ago, right.
Yeah, 105 years ago. Okay, more calls on sex education after the break. Barbara Hestrin is from Planned Parenthood, BC. Dr. Peter Grantham is professor and head of Department of Family Practice at UBC. And we've been discussing, of all things, sex education. And we're going to take some more calls on it. Go ahead from Castlegar.
Hi. I'm calling to comment on sex education in schools. I don't really agree with it because of students and their understanding and the time that would be spent with each individual student to understand sex and the education part, mainly because of my own experience in the high school sex education, where we only had one class in the 8th grade, and it was really kind of more like a giggle party. Some of the girls knew it, and some, like me, didn't. And I really felt, well, I didn't know. I didn't learn anything.
But how many years ago is that?
Well, in the 8th grade, so let me see, I graduated in 76.
Well,
so
it's 15
about
years.
14 years ago.
Yeah, 15 years ago. Surely the level and knowledge of sex education has changed since those days.
Whoa, yes, it has. So I would prefer myself to educate my children at home where I could talk to them.
Well,
so that they will have an understanding, so that they wouldn't get any misunderstandings when they are in a class.
Okay, I really agree with you that that it's really ideal if you are the one who teaches your child at home. The problem with that is that a lot of parents don't do any teaching of their children at all, and a lot of parents are reluctant to because they feel that they don't have the up-to-date information and the knowledge to be able to do a really good job of it. So, in a way, it needs to be looked at, I think, as a partnership.
And a lot of
between
people
schools
can't
and
talk
parents.
to their children even in this day and age.
That is certainly true.
Probably 50% of them.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that, but it's a very interesting phenomenon. What you're trying to do with an education program, and there's 3 things that generally educators describe. You're trying to give some knowledge. Well, you've got to have the knowledge first if you're going to transmit it. Now, sex education programs in schools can do that. You can measure that. Can they answer the questions right? Other things that educational programs do is transmit attitudes, teaching attitudes. And there's a lot of controversy about that. And I think most of us feel that attitudes ought to be a solely parental opportunity and responsibility. And the effort is usually made by people who go into a school to avoid trying to impart attitudes. And that's very difficult to do, by the way, and a lot of people think you can't do it. So you don't try to teach attitudes. You try to teach some knowledge, some facts. You stay away from the attitudes. The real bottom line of education is behavior. Do you change people's behavior?
And that's hard to measure.
And that is impossible to measure, particularly in this area.
Very difficult.
Go ahead, please.
Hi. I'm a parent of 2 small children. Actually, they're both girls, aged 2 and 1. And my concern is I would very much like to teach them sex education, but I am not I'm not sure that I know enough to do it. So where would I go to find out information on sex education so that I could teach them myself?
That's a very, very good question. And in fact, just your being concerned about it is probably the biggest major first step anybody can take. You can do a variety of things. You can approach the nearest Planned Parenthood organization where we do programs for parents, or we provide book lists and reading lists and basic information and so on. And also just a trip to the library and look up information and things that would be appropriate to the age level of your children. And it's never too early to start. You could start yesterday, in
So
fact.
is it good to start with just teaching them about their body themselves and
Definitely.
and just go from there? Or?
That's right. And start with the whole thing about the names for the parts of the body, and the same way that you talk about what the chin is called and what the elbow is called, go all the way down through the body, and all in the same tone of voice.
Great. Thank you very much.
I agree. Another phenomenon that's coming is that I'm seeing schools who are saying, you know, we're inviting you to come and talk to our kids. We want you to come and talk to the parents. And I think a number of schools, in fact, I'm aware of a number of schools in a large number of communities in this province where the school is putting on a parents' day, and sexuality education is one of the topics. And there the parents from that community can go and learn themselves and then become good teachers.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, Jack. I love your show.
Good.
I just want to express myself on one point. Hear me out. I'm a mother of a child, and I'm concerned about what my child will be learning in these sex education classes if they are brought about. And I just have a few other concerns after you answer that.
All right, what will she be learning? How old is your child, by the way?
He's 2.
2. Well, you've got a wee bit
I'm starting early.
No, but the concern's a legitimate one.
I think it's a very legitimate concern, and one of the things that parents need to do, because there's really no set pattern of what is going to be included in a program, unless the parents go to the planning meetings and get involved in the information nights, ask the questions, ask who's going to be teaching, what are they teaching, how are you going to answer specific questions.
Ask for a demonstration.
Ask for a demonstration, exactly.
Right. Dry run.
If my child asks you about AIDS and how do you get it, how are you going to explain about homosexuality to my child? And listen to what people say and have your input into that. Parenting is, of course, a responsibility, and their education is our responsibility too, and we have to be involved all the way through.
Right. One thing I'm very concerned about is that I think communication is the most important word in what we're discussing. And I think that the communication should be between the parents and the children. And for me, if you want my personal opinion, I feel that it's a very dangerous situation that you're putting the children into. Because you just look at the example of the daycares. Those teachers are scanned very seriously, and you know they have all these problems with sexual molestations and everything. And also, I don't want my child to be encouraged to have sex, you know. I want him to talk to me about it, but not be encouraged by these teachers. Oh yeah, go have sex, it's okay, do it, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about that aspect. This is something where my knowledge is totally nil.
Well, I'd like to respond to the first issue with the daycare teachers being screened, and unfortunately 1 or 2 or 3 episodes of potential or considered child abuse in all of the daycares with all of the things that are going on gets all of the publicity. And unfortunately,
Same as Chief Stewart and his bad cop.
Yeah, it's kind of, you know, one bad apple doesn't make the whole barrel rotten. And with sex education, I think that again it comes down to parental involvement and screening of the program and monitoring what's going on and communicating with your child as it's going through. Children are not so fragile that they are going to listen to some person coming in and telling them to go out and have
well
sex.
said. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Am I on?
Yes.
Okay. I got my sex education when I was in the 3rd grade, and then it proceeded to the point of grade 10, where there was Planned Parenthood representatives coming in, and they explained everything. And I found it immensely helpful because it demystified, it took all the fear, and it also gave you alternatives to everything that you were hearing in rumors and whispers and snippets, which helped immensely in clarifying things, whereas my parents were not able to answer any of those questions, not only from the point of view that their knowledge was even less than mine, but from the point of view that coming from an ethnic background, it was deemed not proper to ask such questions to your parents. And that's a concern that hasn't even been addressed at all. It's fine and dandy to let the parents take over sex education. However, at the same time, you must be looking at the situation where people that are out there are not dealing with that with their children. And at the elementary level, let's face it, the students are going to look towards their teachers much more so than their parents, because there is an inherent distrust in some of the things that they have said that have not come out right, where there are paradoxes involved.
Good. Thank you very much, ma'am. It's a very good calls tonight, too. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Oh, no, don't go ahead. Hold on, please.
Okay.
Because that's my last call, I suspect. Well, now, what have I learned from you tonight? That there is more going on in the way of intelligent sex education than I had visualized. Is that correct?
Well,
The Planned Parenthood is still a highly successful organization in British Columbia.
Well,
and
we
that
hope
the
so.
medical profession and the family practice is well aware of the need for sexual education
Yes.
all around.
Yes, including education of doctors.
My thanks to Dr. Peter Grantham and to Barbara Hestrin of Planned Parenthood. And I shall be back after the break. Tomorrow, a spokesman for the Congress of South African Trade Unions, Peter Malango, and also Peter Brown of Canarem, on what's happening in the incredible moves in the Vancouver Stock Exchange from all around the world. Tomorrow, 5 p.m. precisely. Stay tuned for Tony and the News Hour.